Okay, welcome. So yesterday we learned about a machlokes, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, if a chalitza was done or a yibum was done during a period of time where she was mu'uberes. According to Rabbi Yochanan, it's a good chalitza, good yibum, and according to Reish Lakish, it's not a good chalitza and it's not a good yibum. That was the first halacha we learned. We also learned another chiddush that even if the woman has a child, which would then say that she's not zakuk yibum and she could marry, that only happens after the child was born. But while she's expecting, neither her nor any one of the co-wives would be allowed to remarry until the child is actually born. So at the end of the day, yesterday, we learned that Reish Lakish, we pass like Reish Lakish, Amarava, Hilchasa, Kavasid, Reish Lakish, Bahanitlas. There's three halachas, there's three interesting parashiyas where there's a machlokes of Reish and Reish Lakish in which we pass in like Reish Lakish. And the Chad Hada Amar, and the first one is relevant to our Masechta, to Maseches Yevamos, that while a woman is pregnant, her chalitza or yibum will work, it would not work. Okay, that's beautiful. The thing that they're trying to speak out is that there actually are other places. Thank you so much, Mati. There actually are other places where there's an machlokes of Reish and Reish Lakish where we paskin like Reish Lakish. So some of the Rishonim Ramaz, but in the other cases, it's not a machlokes that's exclusively between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. There's other people involved. So could we paskin like Reish Lakish because of the other people who are on this team who've taken his opinion. These three cases, the halacha is like Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan are the only two who are put this in a machlokes. Thank you. Idach. Now we're going to list off two other cases that are not relevant to Yevamos, where there's a machlokes of Reish and Reish Lakish, and the Rav is telling us that in these cases we do pass like Reish Lakish. Ditnan hamachalak mechasav al pi, and Rashi tells us that someone is distributing his estate while he's still alive, and he's not necessarily following it with. He's not necessarily following the rules of Rishon Torah. He's distributing his nechasim the way he wants to. I don't understand the question that was sent in by text. Could be there was some auto editing on it.
Why don't we choshesh that the baby is not the husband's, and there she really still needs even more chalitza. Maybe she had relations with another man.
I'm not sure exactly what the cases you're referring to. A woman lost her husband.
Yeah.
A woman lost her husband and she's expecting.
Right.
So the halacha, she cannot do yibum or chalitza until after the baby is born or until after she has a miscarriage. So what would be the concern?
So even if the baby is born, and you were saying that if the baby is born, she doesn't have to go through yibum or chalitza, she's roy for the rest of the world. But if
Correct.
the baby is not from the first husband,
well, who else would it be from if she didn't have relations with anybody?
What we asked her.
Yeah, I guess we would ask her. Are you sure this is yours?
If you could have twins with two brothers on the same day being born, such unlikely events are discussed. So, I mean, is this such a far-fetched event?
So what are you suggesting? That a woman should never ever be able to do yibum because maybe she had relations with somebody after her husband died?
I mean, it only came to me once we were discussing so much about how you're waiting for the baby to be born to therefore make it, clarify everything in that. And I was wondering how come that's not one of these things we have to. No, I'm not saying that he shouldn't, but why isn't that something we have to compensate for, or why isn't it even something that was discussed? So what's the reason why that's not a
I guess the assumption is that after her husband dies, she's not going to have relations with anybody. I'm sorry?
Oh, she had relations before he died. Obviously, this was because the baby is now here. She's about to have the baby. Who said?
Right, but there's no reason to assume that she's pregnant with someone's child other than her husband's.
You mean the husband who took off with another woman for a year in the Bahamas?
The husband who died. Are you think, well, in the case of Yibam, her husband died. If you're talking about the husband who took off with his other wife, you mean?
Well, no, I'm just saying if you're saying that the all these situations, I'm just wondering in general, how come that's not? Why are we so sure that?
So Mati says a good svar. The halach is roiv bilas achar abal. Unless we know otherwise, we assume that when a woman is expecting, it was conceived by her husband. That's the assumption. There's a roiv that says that.
She's believed to say she hasn't had relations with anybody unless there's evidence. Why would we assume that she's done it unless there's proof otherwise?
Okay, that's also good. Okay. So we have two reasons supporting why we could rely on a woman who's expecting and we're not choshesh. And Adav is asking even better, because we had from the Marat Chias that one of the reasons why we don't do evil nowadays is because how do we know that this fellow doesn't have a child somewhere that we don't know about, that he conceived somewhere and nobody knows about it? So because of that, that's one of the reasons why the Marat Chias says, since it's not Akshar, since people don't always behave exactly the way they're supposed to, because of that, we cannot allow any woman to do Yibam nowadays, because who knows where her husband was at the last business trip. And therefore we don't allow it. But I guess on the wife, we don't choshu.
That's not necessarily an isser for him. That's not an isser deraisa for him.
No, but it would make it usher for, you mean, so the
you should believe the woman because Eid Echad Neman Bezurim. That's not an isser.
So he should, I guess if he declares that he has no other children, you don't believe him anyway. Because he's not Neman Bezurim. Because it's not after Adara. Okay, very good. That's an interesting aura. So let's see the Gemara weiter. So this fellow wanted to distribute his nechasim al piv, meaning following his own rhyme and reason, and not with Yerusha. Like Rashi says here, he's going to give things out the way he wants to. He gave more to one of the children, and less to another one of the children. In other words, he's not looking to split his nechasim equal. He's looking to create World War III after he dies. And the Bechar who was supposed to get Pishnayim, he said, "Nah, I'm going to give him like anybody else." So this is going to be a Lebedik. It'll be very Lebedik for all of Atidinim afterwards. So the halach is Dvar of Kayamin. His declaration as to who should get what is Mukuyim. Why? Because Rashi says the Lakula Nasan Bechayah. These matanos were given to each of the recipients while he was alive. So by the time he died, he had no estate. He had already depleted it and had already given it away. Then Kan Yerusha, Lital Bechayra. First of all, the Bechayra doesn't get Pishnayim because there's nothing left. He does get Pishnayim, but Pishnayim of nothing because there's nothing left because it's already been given away before the deceased died. And the other siblings don't have a claim that they should each get an equal amount. Rather, they get what was given to them by their father before he died. We follow the distribution of what the father did because that happened before he died. So by the time the Yerusha kicked in, there was nothing left to go be Yerusha. However, but if he writes in the star that I want them to get this because of Yerusha, and the lashon of the star would be Peloni Yiresh Sadaplonis or Peloni Sadaplonis. So there, I'm trying to be masnal mashakas of the Torah. The Torah says Yerusha works this way. Now I'm trying to say, no, I want Yerusha to work that way. Lo yamar klum. There, what he said does not work. Kasav bein bechila bein b'seif bein be'emta mishumatana dvar kayom. If he wrote anywhere in the star the word gift, the word matana, then it works. So even though if he says he's going to ask this, he's going to ask this, and then by one of the kids he writes, and I'm giving this to him. Once he writes, even for one of the people in the star, one of the recipients that was giving to in the star, he used the word gift. That makes everything into a gift, and I guess we'll say the Yerusha word is lavdav. The Omar, Rish Lakish, and now Rish Lakish is stating his opinion. La'olam loikana, the gift that he gives will not work. Achiyomer ploini uploini yirshu sada ploinis uploinis shenasatim lahem b'matana v'yirshum. So what is the question over here? We have a Mishnah. We just quoted a Mishnah that says if you say lashon matana, it's good. So what is Rish Lakish saying? Zokt Rashi lo yamas nisan poli. Rish Lakish is not arguing with the Mishnah. The Mishnah says if you use the word matana to matana. There's a machlokes there in how to understand the Mishnah. The Chiyasa Ravin, when Ravin came, Amar Yirish Ploini, Sada Ploini, Visinasan Sada Ploini La Ploini. If someone in the star wrote, property A should go be Yerusha to Reuven, property B should go be Matana to Shimon. In that case, Rabbi Yochanan Amar Kana Afilu Hai di Yerusha. Rabbi Yochanan holds that even the person to whom he said Reuben should get this field be Yerusha, that will work. Why? By mentioning the word matana, even though it's only referring to only one of the recipients, kulu nami matana. We automatically say that all of the gifts that he was giving away, even though he used the lashon Yerusha in the rest of the star, it all works with Teres matana, which works because that is triggered mechayim while he's still alive. Rish Lakish Amar, la'olam lekana hu Yerusha. If in the star he gave some b'matana and some b'Yerusha, the ones b'matana will work, but the ones that he wrote b'Yerusha will not work. Damrinan lahai have matana, lahai Yerusha. Until you say you list everybody individually as a matana. The teku lashon matana tevai. In order to say that the lashon matana is referring to every single gift that he gave out in that event, is only if he uses the word matana for each one, not the word Yerusha. So that is the second place where we have a machlokes Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, and we passed in like Rish Lakish. Ve'idach, and then there's a third place. It's none. Hakosav kol nechasav lebnoi la'achem hoysai. If someone writes a star to his son that after I die, right now I want to keep it, but after I die, I want you this. Let's say Reuben, I want Reuben, my son, to have all my nechas. And Rashi says, how does the mechanics of this Natana work? Shekasav, he wrote in the star, I'm giving it to you, mehayoim ula'achamisa. I'm giving it to you from today to be triggered la'achamisa. Therefore, what is the status of this field, or this tree, from the time that he wrote the star until the time that the father dies? So we say that the what was given at that point was the actual gufa karka, or the goof of the tree, and the father only retained for himself the rights to its produce up until the time he dies.
The trust. He created a trust for his son.
That brings it more to a contemporary language.
To T3. Right. To T3.
That's right. So the halacha is that what is the mechanics of how this works? We say that the son owns the gufa karka, he was coining it now, but the peiros the father owns. So the father now has a kinyan peiros, he has the right to the peiros of the property, and the son owns the actual property. So the halacha is Eina yachal limkar. I'm sorry, ha'av eina yachal limkar. The father right now would not be able to sell this property to a third party, mipnei shenas and leven, because he no longer owns the property, so he can no longer sell it. Then eina yachal limkar, and the son wouldn't be able to sell it now, mipnei shehein b'rishus ha'av, because it's still in the rishus of the father for peiros, so he still has a right to the peiros. Machar ha'av. What happens if the father does sell it? Mechurin ad Yevamos hu. It's considered sold until he dies. And Rashi says, Machar av mechurin lechal halakeich peiros kol yemei chayav. The father had the rights to the peiros of this field for his life, and therefore he has a right to sell whatever he owns. So the right to eat the peiros, as long as the father is alive, that schus the father can sell. The lekeich gets the same schus as the moicher, who's the father in this case. But machar aben, but if the son sold it while the father was alive, ein the lekeich klum, the lekeich gets nothing until the father dies.
Sorry, yes.
Okay?
So if the father sells it, he's only selling the rights to the parish. He's not selling the land. Is that what you're saying?
That's all he has, right? The father. That's all the father has. He could only sell what he owns. Okay, I just want to make a quick announcement now that we're deep inside the shir. Today's broadcast is being sponsored by Reb Benzi Bench. The Ilon Nishmas, today's, I believe it's Yud Aleph Nisan, Ilon Nishmas, the boy b'yoyim yard site of his grandfather, David Aryeh ben Yosef Hakayin Bench. Today, his Yorshai Tein Shmos at Trum Tzvachayim. He should be a Gita Beiter for all of his family, all of his children, and all of Klal Yisrael. Shkoich Bensi. The Itmar, and we learned. Machar haben b'chayei ha'av. What if the son sold his chelet b'chayei ha'av? Umeis haben b'chayei ha'av. But the son died before the father died. So the son wasn't alive to get that kinyan. So the question is, did he have enough at that point to be able to sell? Rabbi Yochanan Amar loy kana lekech. Rabbi Yochanan holds the lekech would not be kana. Rish Lakish Amar kana lekech. And Rish Lakish says the lekech is kana. Rabbi Yochanan Amar loy kana lekech. Rabbi Yochanan says the reason why the lekech is not kana is because kinyan pears kinyan aguvdami. The kinyan just to eat the pears that the father has in it while the father is alive is like he owns the gufa karka, and therefore at that point in time the son doesn't own enough in it to even be able to sell it. Rish Lakish Amar kana lekech. Lekech will be kana because kinyan pears lav kinyan aguvdami. The kinyan to eat the pears that the father has is not in the etzem property itself. That belongs to the son even while the father is still alive, and that the son is able to sell. Let's see Rashi for a little bit of clarification. The halacha is umesa ben b'chayei ha'av. Rabbi Yochanan Amar lo kana lekech. Afilu l'chishayamos ha'av. If the son sells his chus while the father's alive, and then the son dies before the father, then even after the father dies, the lekech will not get it. The kinyan payers the kinyan of payers that the father had in this field, kiginyan aguvdami, was as if he owned the entire property, and therefore the ein mechiras haben mechira, the sale of the son is invalid. We must nizin the katani. The Mishnah does say ein lekech ben klum achiyamos ha'av hakashiyamos ha'av yeshloi. The Mishnah says that if the son sells it before the father dies, the sale works. If the father dies first, so then the kinyan guf triggers, and then the son has it, which can then transfer to his lekeach. In the sky matana, but if the son dies before the father, he never got full ownership of the property that would allow him to sell it. So in this machlokes, once again, we paskin like Rish Lakish, who holds kinyan pairs lafka kinyan aguvdami, and this opens up.
Why? If he sells it while the father's alive,
Right.
We'll consider a sale. We don't know if he's going to die first.
Exactly. So what we're working, if eventually he spreads his ownership over the entire property because the father dies, right? So then it goes to him for that moment, and then they can transfer over to lekeach. But if he never got that,
The sale of the son, it's a good sale even when the father's alive.
only if the father dies before the son. Well, because the son has to get it. If it never got into the son, well, we won't know what the outcome is until one of them dies, and we know who dies first. So you're right. At the time where he sold it, we won't know. So the lekeich will pray that the father should die, or maybe even contribute to the death fund. Yeah. Yeah. Because kinyan pairs lafka kinyan aguf. That's right. Because the father's koich and it's too little.
Right to get this land.
So this is a veltish subject.
It's not even, first of all, he has it now. It's a life estate that the father retains. Not necessarily if he dies.
Many Rosh Yeshivas made tremendous fodder out of this because there are shiurim on Ashir. There are shiurim on Ashir about this sugya of kinyan pairs kinyan aguf. But where does it become relevant? It becomes very relevant in Hilchas Bikurim. We know when someone brings Bikurim, one has to say, right? It has to be from his own land. Frekt Toisvis has to bury the Bakasha. If we hold like Rish Lakish, that kinyan pairs lafka kinyan aguvdami, so let's think about it. When the person who originally got the land, when they came into Yisrael and Yeshua split up the land, that was his. But once he died, if you don't hold a brera, which we don't hold the brera, so Mati brought in brera properly, we don't hold the brera, which means these children split up the estate of their father, right? But the problem is, since we don't hold the Brera, it's possible that I have your part and you have my part. Because of that, the halacha is every yovel, everything goes back into the pot and you resplit it again. Because what's really happening is I'm buying your chelik that I have, and you're buying my chelik that you have. Because we can't say it's over a double in my prayer that this is really all my chelik. So every Yerush is like Mekuchos. Because how do I know this part was destined to me? So which means it's always Chayz B'Yovel. Come to guys, everybody in their own karka only has a Kinyan Peiros. So if you only have a Kinyan Peiros and you hold it with Shlokish, the Kinyan Peiros lav, the Kinyan Aguf, how could you ever bring this one? That is the Velt Kasha that Tosfos asks on this subject. So there's a lot of lumdus thrown around. There's another problem. How about when you want to lend somebody your lulav and esrog on the first day of Sukkot? So you give him a matana manas lahachzer. What does a matana manas lahachzer means? It's kinyan peiros, because he's not keeping it forever. He's going to get the schos to use it. So once again, if you hold kinyan peiros lafkatina guftami, how could you be yoytze? How could you be yoytze with lachem? If it's not lachem l'gabe bikurim, it won't be lachem l'gabe shaking lulav. I'm sorry?
That's how it works. That you don't, it's not just the usage. You actually own it.
But the question is, with the mice only kinyan peiros, isn't the temporary kinyan a kinyan peiros?
That's enough. It looks like it looks like it.
Well, it obviously is, because so there are some Rishonim who learn that since the Torah says give bikurim, and this is the only way it's possible, obviously, at least when it comes to bikurim, that level of lachem must be enough, right? That's what some people learn. Even though it's possible that maybe the mitzvah of bikurim only applies to if there's only one son in each generation, so then you don't have to come on to it. But that's not mistaber. So there are those who show. I think the Rabban says that if the Torah says there's a mitzvah of bikurim, obviously that level of lochem is going to have to be enough, because it's under those circumstances, under reality, that the Torah said you have to give bikurim. But we didn't understand them then. So maybe today we'll understand them. Okay, but so then you have the Tzoysa Choshen. The Tzoysa Choshen says, similar to what you're saying, is that you can have a permanent kinyan that's only temporary. Like it's mine completely now, until it's over. Right, that's how the Tzoysa wants to learn. That's how the Tzoysa wants to learn, and like, but there's a lot of different svaros that the Tzoysa brings down from the different Rishonim as to how to deal with this problem. But that's and he doesn't say, he says it from Rabbi Vigdor Hakayin. Oh, Rabbi Vigdor says your day. From Rabbi Vigdor Hakayin, he brings it down from, and he brings it down from a Rosh as well. This concept that you own it forever until you have to give it back. And
you own it completely until you have to give it back.
That's right. Okay, you own it completely until you have to give it back. That's a better way of expressing it. And he says, Lamoshel, if someone buys a karka, he's going to keep it until Yovel, right? We don't say it's only a kinyan peiros. V'hara, you're allowed to do construction, you're allowed to make boyers, sich the you're allowed to do things to the karka. You have a right to do it. So you see that even though it's a temporary kinyan, it's possible to have a temporary kinyan that's a kinyan aguf. But there are those who say that could be really, even Rish Lakish holds, normally you say kinyan peiros, kinyan aguf. It's dafka when a father is giving a gift to a son, so he's so uber giving, so then he'll even give a kinyan aguf over. So it's only when a father's giving to a son do you say kinyan peiros lav kinyan aguf. But in the normal case, everybody would agree kinyan peiros kinyan aguf. That's how some answer this shaila. That's how some Rishonim answer the shaila. But the Kshosh wants to say even if you hold kinyan peiros lav kinyan aguf, if it's a long-term kinyan until a specific point in time, you'll say that it's a full kinyan for that period of time. Okay, so that's the big sugya of kinyan peiros kinyan aguf. Okay, zok to Gemara weiter. Ein Vlad shal kayom. So the Mishnah said that if the Vlad was not viable, if the Vlad was not viable, it says then Yekayim, then if you did Yibum and you weren't supposed to, you could remain married. And if you remember in the Machlokes, we learned that Yekayim means you have to make another Yibum. You have to make another Bia, because the Bia that was done during the period of time that she was pregnant is not going to be claimed. So Zok to Gemara weiter. Tana we learned Mishum Rabbi Eliezer Amru Yosy beget. Rabbi Eliezer argues on our mission, and he said that since the person did Yibum unlawfully, because he shouldn't have done the yibum while this woman was still expecting, you force him to divorce her, and he cannot stay married to her. In other words, there's a kanas. If we see Rashi over here, Rabbi Lezer Polak Asefet Amastisen, Rabbi Lezer argues on our Mishnah, V'koya Eina Vlad Shokayama Yakayim V'koamar Iyu Afal Pich Eina Vlad Shokayama. Even though the child didn't survive, Kansinile the Yosy, we force him to divorce his wife and never take her back. The Bach sticks in. Mishum the Nichnas L'Sofek Isser Eshusach. When he was boiler and he knew she was pregnant, he was playing with fire. He knew that there's a possibility that the child would survive, and there's a chiv chorus here. Even though now we know that it was mutter because in fact the child didn't survive. Nevertheless, umiyu beget beloy chalitza son. A get's enough, you don't need chalitza, because technically it did work. But he has a knas. So Amar Rava, Rab Meir, Rab Eliezer, Amar Dover Echad. You could see Yevamos, the Gemara is very much into making shaduchim. We're trying to find people who agree with each other. So Rab Meir, who we're going to quote, holds like Rab Eliezer that we also force someone to divorce his wife if he married her when it wasn't appropriate. Rab Eliezer had Amarin, Rab Meir the Tanya. Someone brought this up yesterday. If someone unfortunately dies and he leaves over a wife who's either expecting or with a newborn baby, she's not allowed to get remarried, and it's for 24 months because we want to make sure that the baby will be well taken care of. Vimnasa, and if the marriage was done illegally, Yosy, we force him to divorce this woman, and he could never marry her again. Divrei Rab Meir, those are the words of Rab Meir. Yosy, he has to divorce her, but you still force him to give a get. It's not enough to separate them. You force him to give a get, but when the time comes, he could marry her again. Now, this is also a big shout. Does this apply nowadays? So most Achronim hold that this does not apply nowadays, because nowadays there's other ways of feeding babies. Especially women don't nurse for 2 years. So most Achronim learn that this will not apply nowadays. A. B is, Tosfos discusses, what if it wasn't a Nesua? What if it was only an Arusa? So you never intended to be living with her, you just wanted to tie her up. So Tosfos says as well there, he brings down from Rabbi Yaakov Orleans that if it was only Erison, there also probably wouldn't be a problem. You'd be able to let them get together after the 24 months. Anyway, what?
Probably you wouldn't even need to get just the
So that's what the Rebbe Merlin says. If you look at the first wide line in Tosfos, Rabbi Yosef Merlin's higher matam zeh be'echad shekidesh menekes chaverei shaloi lahatzrich get ela hafrasha ba'om. Exactly like what you're saying. You could write Tosfos. Yeah. Okay. So Zok to Gemara weiter. So Zok to Gemara. So Gemara is suggesting that maybe these two people hold the same halacha. Amalei Abaye Mima, you don't have a right. Dilmaloi, maybe there's no comparison. Why did Rabbi Eliezer over here say you should never marry her again? As Elamishum the Kapaga B'Israel after Raisa. Here you did a major violation. You're playing with fire. You're potentially being over Isra Karis. There, the whole prohibition is with Rabbanan to protect the newborn. So for that, who said we're going to make him divorce his wife permanently? And therefore, Karbanan severely, maybe Rabbi Eliezer here will agree with Rabbanan there that after the 2 years you can take her back. Inami, or it could say on the flip side, why over there the Meir is so strict and say you can never marry her again? Because since the whole issue is only Rabbanan, people wouldn't take it seriously. The Chachamim needed to really throw the book at someone who's over to make sure no one does this, because it's endangering the life of the newborn child. But here when it's a shaila of Ishesach, Mirvish Parshimina, the Rabbanan didn't have to be so strict because they know people are not going to take a rayas lightly. Amar Rava, Zok Rava, according to the Chachamim who says you're allowed to take her back, nevertheless you a get. You can't just separate. You must give a get, which means if this fellow was a kohen, he cannot marry her. Amar Marzutra, Dekanami, the Katani Yosy, Veloy Katani Yafish. It doesn't say you should separate them. It says he must divorce her. Shemamina. Amar Rabashi, the Rab Hoshi of Barej Ravidi. Hasam Tanan, there it says, Lagabe, our Shaila, of Yivam, Rab Shimon Gamliel Omer Kol Shashah Ba'adam Lamidjayim Einin Nefel. if the baby survived for 30 days, it's not considered nefel. Haloisha, what if the baby didn't survive for 30 days? Sveika haven, it would be considered a suffix, meaning we don't know if this woman is mechuyev in yibum or not. The Itman we learned, meis b'soich lamed, what if the baby died within 30 days? V'amdav in iskacha, and she didn't get chalitza, she went and she got married to somebody else. So the question is, was she allowed to get married to somebody else? So Ravina Mishmei Rava Amar, im Eishes Yisrael, if the man that she married illegally, because she didn't get chalitza, well then chalitza, let her do chalitza now. There's not a problem, because even though he's a Yisrael, even though she got chalitza later on, the Yisrael is allowed to marry a woman who got chalitza. But if she married a kohen, if we do chalitza on her now, then they won't be able to stay married. So therefore, you're not chalitz. I'm sorry? The woman was pregnant when her husband died, right? And the baby was born, but the baby died within 30 days. So it's a suffix if this baby is considered a vlachal kayama, which patters her from even though the baby's not alive anymore. But a baby that we know is a viable baby, even if it's on the world one day, it'll patter her from evil. And Rashi tells us that what determines it is if she carried the baby full term or not. And since it's impossible to know exactly when she became pregnant, it's impossible to know if it was full term. So therefore, it remains a suffix as to whether or not this woman needs yibum or not. For that reason, we require chalitza. Yet, in a matter of suffix, she married another person. So if she married a kohen, since it's possible that this woman had a child and therefore she didn't need chalitza, we're not going to force her to get chalitza and then ruin her marriage to the kohen. The major kohen ain't a chalitza. Rabbi Shasha Mishmei Rav Amar Achazu va'achazu chalitzas. Rabbi Shasha says you do chalitza regardless, and too bad the kohen loses his wife. So this actually it's also a whole big shiloh. Here's a sabbath chalutza. A sabbath chalutza, being that chalitza is only usher, a chalutza only usher with rabbanon, by a sabbath chalutza they're going to allow a kohen to remain married to a woman who's a sabbath chalutza, right? However, when it comes to gerushin, they're much more machmer. The Baal Grusha is also the Kohen Deraisa. Even the Lashon Rambam is even something that has a Reach Haget will passel a woman to a Kohen, such as the guy gives a woman a get, almanas, that she's not mutter to anybody. That's a possible get. Yet that woman can no longer marry a Kohen if her husband would die, because it's called a Reich Haget. And this was relevant, Rahman al-Tzon, it's relevant nowadays, and these are the shaylas that come up. Who's that fellow who Mati and me love, who the Rav told the shul to send out a WhatsApp to be a pro-masker, and he says you're a tzeicha, you don't wear a mask. Usher Weiss? So Rabbi Usher Weiss, the Shaila came to him. There are certain, but a black hat it doesn't occur so much, but in non-black hat boys and girls hang out. So the Shaila came to him, and this happens. It seems like this happens. The boys and girls are in a pizza shop, they're fooling around, and it's called a Bisli marriage, because Bisli are round little, like a round little thing. So a guy in a pizza shop, a 17-year-old boy went over to a 16-year-old in a pizza shop, one of all his friends. He put this Bisli on her finger, and he said, but it sounds funny, but this really happened. And then everyone knew it was a joke, but and then she said, what's going on? Kedushin, she right away ate it, and that she freaked out. She realized that she might need a get, and now she won't be able to marry a kohen, and it caused a big tumult. They call it a bisli kedushin. That's what he calls it. So Rabbi Weiss was mad to her for many reasons. Everybody knew it was a joke, and could be bisli. Not the whole stickle about it, but it's very serious, because if she would get a get, even for such a suffix, it would also pass her to a kohen, even though it's a suffix if she even needed a get. So that's why these things could be very serious. And then Rabbi writes, says, Rachman Latlan, that we have such shilas nowadays, that boys and girls are hanging out together in the pizza shop. Rachman Latlan, we should have such a thing. I'm sorry? And then they missed the Meshkiach Shmuzin. Yeah.
You have to hold by the Haredi Rabbanim who hold that boys who hang out in pizza shops are not Royal Edus. They're not kosher Edus.
Amalei Ravina Rabbi Misharsha. Amalei Ravina Rabbi Misharsha. Ravina told Rabbi Misharsha, this is a murder situation over here. So what happened over here? Rabbi Misharsha said in the name of Rava that Achazu v'achazu chayletzes, notice he's being machmer, and he's saying too bad, the kohen is going to lose his wife. So look what he said over here. This is what Rava said at night. In other words, at night he said that it's eina chiletzes, that it is chiletzes. He was machmer. With Safar the next morning, Hadarba, Rava was chayzer, and Rava said that he could stay married, which in his mind is a big problem. Azakula, Rava will allow a kohen to stay married. Amr le sharisu. He said, you're telling me Rava said it was mutter? Yeah, Rava tishtu aftarba. So the next thing you know, exactly like Mother says, the next thing you know, they're going to be matter to eat chaylev. Right? It's a slippery slope. So there are those who say a go'onish pshat. Somebody I don't know the sense of go'onish pshat. What's up is we're comparing this to chaylev? What's going on over here? So there's a Gemara Chulin that discusses the chaylev shal gaba yakeva. And the question is that chaylev also or not? So Rabbi Yishmael, who was a kohen, was matir kohanim to eat that chaylev because he held it wasn't chaylev. So they used to say Rabbi Yishmael, who's a kohen, is sticking up. He's advocating on behalf of kohanim, and he's being matir this chaylev to them. So that's exactly what he meant here. Is that Yerav the Tishtur Avtarba? I see you care about kohanim, and you're trying to save this kohen's marriage. You're probably also going to allow that chaylev as well, like Rabbi Yishmael, to eat that type of chaylev. Zok Gemara. So Hachanami here too. Muberes chaverei umenekes chaverei ha'anesul l'kohen. So now we want to know this that we just quoted was the question if the woman needed chalitza or not. Now let's go back to our sugya when someone was not supposed to marry a woman who was pregnant for 2 years, where we know we have a machlokes if he can take her back or not. Right? We just had that shayla. So what would be over here? Mi avud rabbanan takantel l'kohen. What if it was a kohen who married her? Would they say, okay, you don't have to divorce her because if you divorce her, you won't be able to marry her at all? Or maybe, too bad, the kohen will have to divorce her and never be able to take her back. Bishlama, in the case of chalitza, since there are rabbanim who actually argue in Shimon Gamliel, the army and they say, even if the baby didn't survive 30 days, Vlad Ma'al Yahava. So therefore, there is a shita who's makel. There's a shita who holds that the baby is considered a viable baby, and this woman is in fact allowed to marry anybody. So we have someone who we could pass like b'makom tchak, but over here, how could you suggest that someone would allow the kohen to remain married to her? There's nobody who allows that. Come on over. According to the mayor, he could never marry her again, no matter who he is, whether it's Yisrael or a kohen. And even if you look at the Rabbanon, how many beget? He didn't say be mafresh, he said get. So there's no who you're going to be saimach on. There is no one to be saimach on. So for a kohen, this would be a big problem. Zok the Gemara back. Correct. Rashi says over here. If a behemoth survives even 1 day, it's not considered a nefel, right? That was Shimon said, or he says lamijoim, but Rashi says. I'm sorry. Right. Yep.
And he makes a deal.
Right. It's a subject, but there are those who hold. I'm sorry.
Here you're saying that there's a bar book, there's somebody that.
Well, we have a Shimon Gamliel who says if we show lamijoim is not a nevel, and Rashi sticks in over here. We should really focus on Rashi here for a second. Rashi says over here, "Eine nevel upater esimim nachalitza sveiku b'chalotis l'mekabebes b'davka imisavka lon ikalu lechadoshav iloi avil kimlon the kalu lechadoshav tinik b'nyoim upater v'neibim." So normally, if we know it was a full-term pregnancy, then even a baby that was alive for 1 day would pater from ibum. Here we don't know what's called a chadasha. So there's a significant suffix with people that you could rely on that would actually say that this woman was allowed to marry without chalitza. But over there, there's no path. There's no path to citizenship. If you want to use that's far. Okay, so let's go back there. Easy Gemara over here. So Zok to Gemara. Let's see what we have over here. Itmar. What if he made kedushin within 3? I'm not sure if it means if it means it
3 months.
means 3 months, an almana or grusha, so we don't know if she was pregnant. But there are those who learns it's within 2 years, because we're talking about the same sugya of a woman who had a baby.
Shloisha comes to 2 years.
No, it's the words of Gemara Shloshah. I think there are those who learn that we're referring to. I think there are those Rishonim who learn that it's referring to the case that we said before with the 2 years. But let's see what it says over here. Shloisha would be negated to chalitza, but if you look at the context of the Gemara, that's not what it says. So and he ran away, which means he made kedushin, but he had no intention of actually living with her. Any almana grusha, which means from Rashi that it's not speaking about someone involved with Gibor. So clearly the shaila is the shaila of 2 years, okay? And what uvarch, and he ran away, meaning he's clearly not planning to live with her. Yeah, but yeah, al tafchana, you mean? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I missed up. Right, this is worse. Right, this is worse because not only is there a problem of it's not 2 years left. Oh, you're right. We're not even speaking about a child. I was totally mixed up. You're right. We're not talking about a child. You always have to wait 3 months because just in case she turns out being pregnant, you don't know who the father was. So what happens if he was makajer within 3 months, uvarch, but then he split, meaning he had no intention of making beer with her. One month we put him into chayrim, and we put him into chayrim. The Mefarshim explained we don't force him to give a get. We put him into chayrim to make sure that he'll stay far away from her, so that he'll have no connection to her, so there'll be no chance that there'll be a bia.
How you put him in the chair? He was borrowed.
You put him into chayrim so that he can't come back. And there's actually a shaila where he ran to. There are those who learn that we only allow this if he ran away far enough that he can't come back for 2 years. But if he's only on the next block, it wouldn't be negaya. But there are those who learn that the chair means if you put him in the chair, then you know he won't have relationship with her.
You wait 2 years.
But we just learned that you can't live with her for 2 years as well. And if he is, then you make him give a get. Oh, that's it. That's it. No, 2 years if there's a child, so that the child should survive. Yeah. Okay, but you're right. If 3 months means if there's no baby, maybe she wasn't even pregnant. You're right. Okay, very good. The Chad Amar Iruke Mistaya. And the other mother holds, no, the fact that he ran away proves that his intention wasn't to live with her. So there shouldn't be a problem here. That's right. He wanted to tie her up. Have Ovda Ba'amalu Rafram Iruke Mistaya. Rabban Paskin Lamaskana, that in fact there's no problem, even though he didn't wait for Afkana, he made the kedushin, but he had no intention to make this. Zaktimar, Savik Ben Tasha. What if you have a fellow, we don't know if he is the son of the first husband or the son of the second husband, right? So the Mishnah tells us that although they have to break up because could be she had a child, the child for sure is not a mamzer because the mother if the child was born from the first father, he's not a mamzer, and if he was born from the second father, then it's even he's not a mamzer. Amalei Rav Nachman. Why don't you say Lema Halach Achar Rav Nashim? Why don't you say you give us a Rav Nashim? Rav Nashim Letitia Yalden, and most women carry a baby full term, and therefore, let's say that it's the son of the first father. Zaktimara Amalei Nishedi Dan Lishiva Yalden. Our women in our neighborhood give birth after only 7 months. Amalei. So he told him back. So Rabbi told him back. I don't understand. Nishedi Tchu have a ruba de alma. Just because your nashim give birth after 7 months, you're going to tell me you could be soymech on that? Amalei, no. Hachi kamina. Roiv nashim yaldon l'tisha. Most women carry a baby full term. Umiyat l'shiva. Yes, there are those who only keep it, who the baby is born after 7 months, in fact. However, b'chol, the emphasis on the b'chol ha'yerledes l'tisha, any woman who carries a baby full term, it's always going to be ubra nikar l'shlisha mel. It's guaranteed that you'll be able to tell after 3 months that she's pregnant. Vizu, this woman, hoyol v'loy hukar ubra l'shlisha mel. In our Mishnah, after 3 months, we didn't see that she was showing. Isra Laruba, it messes up the roid, because if in fact she was a full-term pregnancy, it should have been noticeable. So therefore, we're choshed that maybe it's from the second father. Frank the Gemara, if it's a fact that every single woman who carries full term, you can tell, Well, this woman after 3 months you couldn't tell. So if I think we should have proof that it's the second Baal that was the father. Let's reword that. Roiv women who carry full term, roiv of those women you'll be able to see after 3 months. In this woman, and it remains a suffix, and since it remains a suffix, it has all the halachas of suffix. So the halachas of suffix is that we're going to see it again. Yerusha, and it's negated to the other halachas between the father and the son. Okay, let's see the Gemara weiter. Tanarban, Rishon, Royu, Leois Kohen Gadol, B'Sheni Mamzer. What happens if the baby was born and this baby was a suffix, but then they had a second child? They had a second child because they stayed married. The halacha, our Mishnah says, is that if she has a child, he has to divorce her, because could be she is an Ishasach, but what if he stayed married to her and they had a second child? So Rishon Royal Kohen Gadol, the first child who's a suffix, Rishon suffix Sheni, is 100% kosher, he could be the Kohen Gadol, who's Sheni Mamzer Misafik, and the second one is a suffix Mamzer, because in the event, in fact, that the child was viable and the child belonged to the first father, this is a chiyuv kares. Ain't Mamzer Misafik. We don't say that it's a Mamzer Misafik. I'm sorry?
One child is a mamzer.
Because the first child born, if it was born from the first father, it's for sure kosher. And if the child of the second father, it's also kosher because it's a kosher ibum. But the second one might be a mamzer. So Zakir Blazman Yaakov ain't mamzer misafik. There's no mamzer misafik, and we're going to soon see what that means. Mike Amar by Hachikam. Rishon royalty is Kohen Gadol, the Sheni suffix mamzer, but since he's only a suffix mamzer, v'asher b'mamzeres. Not only can't he marry Yisrael, he can't even marry mamzeres because maybe he's not a mamzer. Rabbi Blazman Yaakov Aimer ain't no suffix mamzer, elavade mamzer, umuta b'mamzeres. And we're going to see what that means is that he's a suffix mamzer, but a suffix mamzer is allowed to marry a vade mamzer. So it's not a problem. Rav Amar Hachikamer. Rishon royal is Kohen Gadol, Musheni mamzer vadai. He's a mamzer vadai misafik, umuta b'mamzeres. So Rav learns exactly the opposite. The first time they held that it was muta b'mamzeres, and Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov was machmer, and he said, "Ein vadai mamzer misafik, lo suffik mamzer, but also b'mamzeres." So basically, the machlokes is Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov mekel, like in the first shita, like Abaye says, or is Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov machmer, the way Rav understands it. So Zok to Gemara, the kamifilgi b'der Rabbi Elazar, and the machlokes is in Rabbi Elazar, because Rabbi Elazar is the one who discusses if a suffix mamzer can marry a vadi mamzer. The time Rabbi Elazar, Aimer, vadan bevadon mutter, vadai bevadai is mutter, vadai b'suffix bevadai, b'suffix osher. Why? Because if it's because we don't know if one of them might be mutter, one of them might be osher. What are the suffix? Shtuki. A shtuki is a child who, whenever the child points to his father, his mother says, "No, that might not be your father. Don't call him daddy." Basufi is a child who we just found abandoned. The kusi is a goy, is a kusi, but we consider them mamzerim because they don't recognize kedusha kesef, and therefore a woman might have accepted kedusha kesef and then married somebody else, when she was an eshishish. Rabbi Marav said halacha is like Rabbi Elazar. In other words, we paskin halacha lemaisa that a suffix and a vadai is going to be usher. A suffix and a vadai is going to be usher. So
What's a mamzer vada and suffix? Since it's a suffix, it's a vada.
it means the same thing. He's just trying to bring out. We consider him like a mamzer vadai, and therefore that's right. So just playing with the words to make it mutter to marry a vadai mamzer. Halacha is like Rabbi Elazar. So we pack in halacha l'maisa that a suffix mamzer may not marry another suffix mamzer, or a suffix mamzer not marry a vadi mamzer. Kamriza kamei to Shmuel. When I told this to Shmuel, Amar li Hillel taught us Asara Yuchsan Olam Bavel. There were 10 levels of different people from different yichus that came out of Bavel, and out of these 10 people, there's different groups that are allowed to marry each other, and there are different groups that aren't allowed to marry each other. So Kana Levi Israeli. Chalolim, Gerim, Charum Aravadim Shachvarim, Mamzerim Nesini, Shtuka Vasufi, V'chulan Mutar and Zebozeh. and they're all mutter one to another. And Rashi explains they're not really all mutter one to another. There's three groups of who's allowed to marry who. Rashi says as follows: Mutar and Zevazeh is as follows. Kohanim, Levim, Yisraelim are Mutar and Zevazeh. Levim, Yisraelim, Chalolim, Gerim, and Charureh are Mutar and Zevazeh. And Gerim, Mamzenim, Nesinim, Shtuki, Asufi are Mutar and Zevazeh. So there's some overlap of who could marry who. So the at Amr Halacha Krabbelazer, Beis Hill just said that these people could marry each other, and you're saying that a Suffolk cannot marry a Suffolk? Zot Gemara, Abaye Savar Lach Shmuel. Abaye holds like Shmuel, the Amr Halacha Kehillah. Abaye holds like Shmuel, who passes like Hill, and Hill says that a Suffolk is allowed to marry a Suffolk, and therefore Umuki Leila Rebbe Lezer ben Yaakov and Libed Hilchasa, and therefore Abaye learned that Rebbe Lezer ben Yaakov is matir, because we want to always say that Allah is like Rebbe Lezer ben Yaakov, because the Gemara tells us that the Mishnah Rebbe Lezer ben Yaakov is kavanah. Rebbe Lezer ben Yaakov was always right. So since Rebbe Lezer ben Yaakov was always right, Abaye made sure to learn Pshat in Rebbe Lezer ben Yaakov that it should stem with who he paskin. So since Abaye paskins like Shmuel, who paskins like Hillel, that says a suffix is mutter, so he had to make sure that that's what Rebbe Lezer ben Yaakov said as well. So there shouldn't be a problem with paskin Rebbe Lezer ben Yaakov and paskin that suffix is mutter. Rava Savar Law Karav, the Amar Halacha Rebbe Lezer. Rava holds like Rav, who holds that suffix is usher. So therefore, that's how he needed to explain Rebbe Lezer ben Yaakov. Umukil Rebbe Lezer ben Yaakov aliba de hilchasa kehechet latikshi hilchasa hilchasa. So basically, if you pass on halacha lemaisa that suffix is usher, you're going to make sure that that's what the Rebbe Lezer ben Yaakov said. And if you know suffix is mutter, you're going to make sure that that's what the Rebbe Lezer ben Yaakov said. So this way, Rebbe Lezer ben Yaakov was always aliba de hilchasa. Okay, let's stop over here. I'm not able to get more ahead than an Amid.